In this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of how to use Desmos. And Desmos is a web-based graphing calculator that's free to use. So if you go to desmos.com, desmos.com, if we go to desmos.com, it'll bring you to the landing page, and you can press the Start Graphing button to pull open the actual graphing calculator. So Desmos is very friendly to use and it's free, so it makes it a great option for a graphing calculator if you're taking an online course. So the Desmos graphing calculator consists of two main parts. So on the left-hand side over here, we have an input area where we're going to type things in. And then on the right-hand side, we have the graphing area where things we type in will be plotted. So essentially, we enter expressions on the left, Desmos graphs it on the right. So on this left-hand side, we can enter computations and it'll actually show us values. So kind of like a normal calculator, we can enter expressions like 3 divided by 5, and it'll actually compute the value of this expression out. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We can enter whatever kind of mathematical expression you want, and it'll show you the numerical value for that. So in that way, you can use Desmos like an actual calculator, and it gives you this visual, nice visual feedback of what you're typing in. So it's got a great editor for entering math expressions and computing values. Now, if you want to delete an entry, either you can delete all of this out, or you can press this X on the right-hand side of each line. So if you press that X, it's going to clear out that line and take your cursor to the next line. So we can enter computations and it'll compute values, but we can also enter equations into this input area. And once we enter an equation, it'll try to show us the graph of this thing. So if Desmos understands what we're typing in, it'll show us a graph. So as an example, we could type the equation y equals x minus 2 squared plus 3. And when we type that in, it's going to show us the plot of this equation. So it'll put y on the vertical axis and x on the horizontal axis here. And you'll notice that if you click on this graph, like the actual graph of this equation, it'll highlight some points for us. So it'll identify intercepts where the graph intercepts axes. So it shows us here that this graph intersects the y-axis at 0, 7. Minimums, it shows us we have a minimum value of 2, 3, or a point corresponding to that, and various other important points. So if you have various things going on, Desmos will identify some of these points. Now you can also click on the graph and drag along here, and it'll put a point there and show you the coordinates of that point. So you can do various things by tracing a point along that graph. We can also graph more than just one equation. So if we click on the next line, so if I click on that empty space in the next line over there, and I type another equation, y equals 2x plus 1, then it'll plot that equation as well. If you want to change the colors of the plot, click this circle to the left of the equation and hold that for a little bit, and it'll give you some graphing options. So you can style this to do dashed or dotted lines, and then you can also change the color. So we could select red to make that plot red. Okay, now like before, we can quickly identify intersection points. If you click on either one of these graphs, it'll highlight some important points. So now it identifies the intersection of these two graphs. So we have an intersection point at 1.268, 3.536. And so this gives us the point where those two graphs intersect, as well as this other one. So this is very useful. It's very quick to identify intersection points, and takes away a lot of the hassle of trying to use a handheld graphing calculator. Now, if you want to pan and zoom, you can click and drag the screen to pan around the graphing view. If you want to zoom, you can either use your mouse wheel. So if you scroll it with your mouse, you should zoom in and out. There's also buttons for zooming in and out. So you can press those buttons to zoom in and out. Or if you have a touch screen, you can pinch the graphing view to zoom in and out. You'll notice that in the graphing view, there's a little wrench up at the top right corner. If you press that wrench button, it'll pull open some options. So you have these are essentially settings for the graphing view. So one of them is a projector mode, which will make everything thicker and a little easier to see. You can change whether or not you have a grid shown and which kind of grid. and some various options relative to your grid. Another important one is you can change the values on your x-axis, so like the x-axis range. So if you wanted x to go from, say, -5 to 5, just enter that in that equality, and then in the graphing view, it'll show us from -5 to 5. And then you can do something similar for y. If you wanted to zoom y out quite a bit, you could do y equals -20 to y equals 100 to zoom out on the y-axis quite a bit. So you can change the scale of these axes and zoom in and out using that setting right there, which can be helpful. Another useful option, if you go over to the input area, press this little Add Item button, you can select a table. So if I press Table, it'll create a table of values. And in the first column there, I'll just enter a variable x. And then in the next column, I could enter something like an expression using x. So let's do x minus 2 squared plus 3. And then we'll do another column with 2x plus 1. And now as I enter x values into our first column, so we'll do 0, 1, 2, 2.5, 2.6, Desmos is going to compute these values for us right away. So without even having to do a bunch of computations, we can create a table of values just by entering a name for one column, and then use that name in other expressions in these other columns here. And then Desmos will quickly create all of these values for you in this table, which can be a very useful thing if you want to compute a bunch of values based on a pattern. Okay, so that's an overview of Desmos and should help you get started using Desmos. It's a very powerful thing to use, so I encourage that you get used to using this. And for an online course, this is a great option to use as a graphing calculator. You don't even have to pull out a handheld calculator.